Happy Sunday everyone, welcome back to episode 36 of Manny's Food Channel. It's your boy Manny, and for today's episode I'm going to be making a very simple dish. This recipe here has maybe no more than 6 to 7 ingredients and doesn't take long to make at all. It's going to be a delicious stuffed Filo pastry with Boursin cheese, caramelized onions, and a little bit of seasoning as well. Now this recipe here, you can customize it to make it your own with different kinds of cheese, herbs, or any kind of spices you like. But I just went with a winning combination that I absolutely enjoy and I know that my friends and family will enjoy as well. So without further ado, let's start baking. So let's start off with the caramelized onions. It's one of my all-time favorite toppings to put in anything, such as the filling that we're going to use for this Filo pastry here, but also for burgers as well. It's a great little recipe. It's extremely easy to make. It's all about the technique. So what I'm going to do here is first I'm going to heat up this pan or pot, whatever you're going to use. You don't want to put it on too high of a heat because you don't want to burn the onions. You want to slowly cook them down and reduce them so that it pulls out those natural sugars in the onions in order for them to caramelize on their own. So once your pot is heated up, I use canola oil, but a lot of the times I like to use butter as well. We're going to be using some butter in order to seal our pastries today, so I'm not going to use butter to make this caramelized onions. And here I have probably around, I would want to say 5 to 7 liters of onions. They're roughly sliced, they don't need to be anything fancy. And I know you're probably looking at this and wondering how come I have so much onions. Once this is all complete, said and done, you're probably going to get maybe 500 to 750 milliliters of caramelized onions at the end. And once they just continue to reduce and lose their size, and there isn't much left in the end. So you definitely want to start off with a lot of onions. So I'm going to toss these in here. So don't be too worried if your onions fill up your whole pot or your pan. Eventually it's going to reduce to probably around the halfway or the quarter-way point of the height of your pot. Now depending on who you talk to, typically caramelized onion might take about an hour and a half to 2 hours, or an hour to 2 hours, just depending on how you cook them, how much you take care of them during the cooking process. And depending on who you talk to, some chefs say either to cover with a lid or don't. I'm personally going to cheat just a touch because I want to speed up the cooking process of the onions. So I'm going to cover it with a lid. I'm not going to season it with anything at all until the caramelized onions are almost ready, because as it continues to reduce, you don't want it to be overly seasoned or overly salty. So now I'm going to cover it with a lid and let it slowly cook off for at least an hour. And I'm going to mix it every 5 to 10 minutes or so to make sure that one side is not cooked more than the other, or I'm not burning the onions. So now I'm going to cover with a lid and we're going to move on to preparing the rest of the filling for the Filo pastry. Now typically for this kind of recipe, you can really put any kind of cheese or any kind of filling you like. Now I'm using a front face camera, but this here is Boursin Cheese. It's one of my all-time favorite. It's garlic and herb flavor. It's extremely flavorful, delicious, and melts in your mouth. And it's extremely good for doing something of a Filo pastry variety. So what I'm going to do here is I have a bowl. First I'm going to dump in about 2 boxes of this Boursin cheese. Again, depending on where and what kind of access or what kind of cheese you can get your hands on, you can certainly change this up. But I like garlic and herb flavored cheese, so I'm going to use Boursin. And I'm going to dump these in here. I'm not going to lie, I may have dug into the other one because I do not have the patience to wait for it, so I ate a little bit here, but I'm going to toss this in. And then next you're going to grab a spoon and make sure you break up the Boursin cheese. You don't want clumps, you want it nice and smooth, kind of like room temperatured cream cheese in a sense. Now I did let these sit outside at room temperature for around 10 to 15 minutes or so, just so it's a little bit more pliable and easy to work with. And then next, season it with some fresh ground black pepper. I love black pepper and it gives a nice balance and a bit of a kick and spice to the filling. Next, I'm going to add chili flakes. I'm not going to add too much. And right now it might look like it's a little bit too much, but remember we're also going to be adding a ton of caramelized onions. So just toss in some chili flakes. And then finally, the last herb I'm going to be adding is some oregano. Now you can add any kind of herb you like, whether it's dried parsley, dried thyme, anything that you think would add and contribute, jazz up the flavor of the filling. And then give this a really nice mix. You can certainly use a mixer if you want, but it's not that hard. You can just use your hand. And make sure this is all well incorporated, mixed in very nicely. I'm not going to season it with salt because the cheese is already seasoned. It already naturally has a lot of salt. And when the caramelized onions are ready, or almost ready, we're going to season that with salt as well. So if you feel that once you add the caramelized onions that you need to add a bit of salt, then add salt, but otherwise just leave it as it is. And once this is done, I'm going to set it aside. I'm going to go back to see how our caramelized onions are doing. Okay, so let's have a look here. As you can see, it's already been reduced. And I've only been cooking it for around 10 minutes or so, not even. And the reason why we put that lid there is to kind of wilt it down quicker, to start quickening the cooking process and the caramelization of these onions. Again, you want to make sure that you're stirring it every at least 5 minutes, so that way you don't burn it. There's a difference between burning the onions and caramelizing the onions. If caramelizing the onions pulls out the natural sugars in the onions and give it that nice, sweet, decadent texture and flavor that we know of. Whereas when we burn it, it's just because we cooked it too fast and we didn't manage to pull out all the sugars from the onions. So we'll let this continue to cook for I would say at least another 45 minutes or so. And in the meantime, we'll just move on to making a very quick and easy aioli dip that we're going to use for this Filo pastry. So when it comes to aioli, you can really use and customize any kind of ingredients that you like, but the foundation and the base will always be mayonnaise. So for the aioli I'm going to go for today, I personally love anything spicy related, and I always have a couple bottles of any kind of hot sauce in my fridge. And my favorite, Frank's Buffalo hot sauce. So I'm going to do a Frank's Buffalo aioli, if you will. Alright, so now we start getting into the caramelization stage. You start to notice that it's wilted down by a bunch. As I mentioned earlier, about halfway or the 3/4 way of the pot. So once you get to this stage, you want to make sure that you stand right beside your pot because you don't want to burn the onions. You want to caramelize it, and you're going to constantly mix it. And you should hear a very nice sizzle constantly throughout this part of the cooking process. And you'll start to notice that your onions are starting to caramelize or start to turn like a dark caramel brown kind of color. But this does take another 5 to 10 minutes or so. But again, you don't want to leave your stove. You want to make sure that you constantly mix it, especially if you have it on a higher than normal heat temperature. And right now I have it on medium to high heat. I didn't totally crank it up because I want to make sure I'm in control of the temperature of the onions. So now I'm going to constantly mix this until it turns very nice dark caramel brown, and then we'll cool this off on a plate or something in the fridge, and then continue on with making the Filo pastry. Alright, so now as you can see, as I mentioned earlier, we had a lot of onions and it reduced to almost nothing. And here I probably have around maybe 500 to 750 milliliters of onions. And this is why I originally had used so much onions, because eventually they wilt and it'll decrease in size. Now, I'm still not finished caramelizing these onions. However, if you taste it at this process right now, it's got a really nice caramel color on it, and you're going to notice that it's extremely sweet. However, I am almost done cooking them, but I'm going to season it just a touch with a little bit of salt. and then possibly some black pepper if you want to add some black pepper in there, which I'm going to do. And then once this is finished, we'll put it on a plate, cool it off, and I'm going to cool it off quickly by putting it in the fridge. After that, we'll add it to the mix, and I'll show you how we're going to do the Filo. Okay, so now that the onions have cooled down, I'm going to mix it in with my Boursin Cheese mix here. Make sure you mix it thoroughly, and if you need to season it up again, season it up, because, you know, for obvious reasons, once you put the filling inside and you cook it off, you can't re-season it, right? So just give this a really nice mix, and then we'll move on, and I'll show you how to fill the Filo pastry with this filling. Okay, so here I have my Filo pastry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start shaping it out into the size that I'm looking for. So beside me I have a bowl of just melted butter, and it might look like a lot, but eventually you're going to want to not egg wash, but butter wash your Filo pastry. So make sure you be generous with the amount of butter that you're using, because we're going to double layer this part of our pastry. So make sure you go edge to edge so that way it sticks on all corners. And then once you evenly distribute it, or enough butter rather, then you take the other half and just flip it over and make sure it sticks real nice. And then next up, I'm probably going to only use half the size, so I don't need, otherwise it's going to be too big, so I don't need the full size here. I'm just going to gently cut this in half. And then set this aside, or if you want to do 2 in 1, you totally can. But just for my purposes here, to show you guys how I'm going to do it, I'm just going to use one for now. And you don't want to put too much filling, okay? You want to make sure that you have just enough filling so that way it doesn't burst, and you evenly distribute the amount of filling in here. And then all we're going to do is we're going to fold triangles. So fold a triangle here, and in the first step, evenly distribute those ingredients. And then next up, another triangle, and so on and so forth, until we have a really nice looking Filo or Filo. And then grab some butter for the edge, and then just seal this off. And if there's any excess, then grab your knife and just cut off the rest. And this is how you make your Filo pastry. Now I'm going to put this under a paper towel that's damp, so that way it doesn't dry out. And I'll continue to work on the rest until we've completed the amount that we want to use or that we want to make. And then we can go on to cooking this pastry. Alright, so once all your pastries are done, or you've finished building all your pastries, I'm going to grab my batch here. I didn't make too much because I'm not going overboard with it. You can certainly make more and freeze them if you want to have them freshly prepared, so that way all you have to do is cook them in the oven from frozen. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the remaining butter, and I'm going to brush the top side of my pastry with a nice generous amount of butter. It's going to give that nice color to it, that nice crunch that we're looking for, a bit of that caramelization, and also adding some flavor to these pastries as well. And then I'm going to put them in the oven now at 350 degrees for probably around 10 to 12 minutes. I'll check it out. If they're ready, or if I feel they're ready, then I'll remove them and we can start plating. But if you're cooking it from your side and you feel that it needs to stay in the oven a little bit longer, it all depends. Sometimes somebody's oven might be more powerful than others. So you just have to gauge and make sure that you don't overcook it, but also you have that nice brown color and crunch texture that you're looking for. So now I'm going to pop these in the oven and we'll cook them off, and once they're ready we can start plating. When it comes to making these kind of pastries, you know you've done a really good job once you see all the nice layers and then very good and thick stuffing inside. You don't want to be short on the stuffing because the stuffing is the essence and the deliciousness of these kind of pastries. So without further ado, I'm going to do a taste test, and as always, hope it tastes the absolute best. Cheers. This is really freaking good. It's extremely crunchy, and the inside's got that sweetness from the caramelized onions and that nice creaminess that we got from the Boursin Cheese. Again, depending on what kind of cheese you want to stuff it with, I would even recommend using feta cheese. It would be freaking delicious. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you enjoyed this video, please give my video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing everyone next time. Have a great week.